Hello there, good evening. An incorrectly filed flight plan could have been responsible for the disruption to thousands of flights, the chief executive of the UK's air traffic control told Sky News tonight. His organisation and the government apologised today as the disruption continued. We've spoken to travellers whose holidays were cancelled before they could even begin, and tourists desperate to get home as they run out of medication or just need to get back to work. It was all simply not acceptable, the boss of Europe's biggest airline said. Our first report is from Sky's Katerina Vitozzi.
In moments like this, home feels very far away. For thousands of Britons still stuck overseas, there have been hours spent on cold floors and in long queues. This video was from late Monday night at Fuerteventura Airport.
Right, so my EasyJet website that we can all access says that you guys have to, by law, accommodate us.
All hotels were full, leaving passengers, many with young children, with nowhere to stay. We spoke to one family stranded in Norway with no flight home until Saturday.
I myself am on medication for a rare blood disorder. My husband is in a wheelchair and has a rare neurological disease. And because it was my son's wedding, we also brought their 83-year-old grandmother with us. So I'm going to run out of medication. I've had to cancel work. I've had to cancel hospital appointments. I'm now trying to get medication. It's just, it's not okay.
It has been, for many, utter misery.
It is incredible to reflect that a technical glitch that was resolved in a matter of hours continues to cause such intense disruption both in the UK and overseas. Here at Manchester Airport, well, yesterday it was one of the most affected airports in the UK, and although there are flights still operating today, we're told that many are cancelled and there are severe delays on others.
Ryanair says its cancellations alone have affected around 40,000 passengers and that there needs to be answers still from NATS, the company that provides the air traffic systems.
We still haven't had an explanation from them what exactly caused this failure yesterday and where were their backup systems. It's not acceptable that UK NATS simply allow their computer systems to be taken down and everybody's flights get cancelled and delayed.
But NATS has now released some details about what went wrong.
The issue we had yesterday was related to flight data. The flight data that our system received, it didn't understand, it couldn't interpret it. In those circumstances, it's important that none of that appears in front of an air traffic controller. We don't want them to act in an unsafe way with unreliable data. So we went to manual systems, backup systems that allowed us to continue operating, but at a much lower capacity, handling less flights.
But a fuller report isn't expected for another week. For many families, it's too little too late. Georgina Briers' all-inclusive holiday to Greece was cancelled. It would have been the first time away for her two kids since before the pandemic.
I even start crying thinking about it. It just breaks my heart because it's just not fair on them. We've got no other option. Even looking for places in the UK, how am I supposed to do that now with they've got my money? Who has another spare £3,000?
Automated messages she received today from her Greek holiday rep simply rub salt into the wound.
If you need us outside of these times, please get in touch. Have a lovely holiday.
This is a summer break some will want to forget, but one that, for many, never even got started. Katerina Vitozzi, Sky News.
Well, tens of thousands of British people fly to Crete on holiday each year, and as elsewhere, many are now caught up in the disruption. One woman we spoke to said her son was running out of diabetes medication while they waited for a flight home. Our correspondent Alistair Bunkle reports now from the island's capital.
Heraklion Airport on the Greek island of Crete is busy every day of the summer holidays, but when there's been a breakdown in air traffic control, it's chaos. Coaches full of British holidaymakers arrived to drop off people for their flights, but by late morning, flashes of red were starting to appear on the arrivals board as flights from the UK were cancelled.
Waiting to fly back to Manchester, and we just had a text now from Jet2 saying that it's going to be cancelled until tomorrow, and that's all we know for now. So we're going to be bused to an accommodation and go from there and see where we get put.
The Davis family from Manchester weren't going anywhere. Instead, it was a night in a new hotel on Crete.
So we've 2 hours here, and now we're going to have to go and find our own accommodation and transport. They've offered to take us somewhere, but there's 300 people that need accommodation sorted, so we've got to book it ourselves.
People told us they were glued to flight tracking apps, watching and hoping their flight would take off from the UK. And most did, although with some delays.
I have to say, most of the people we've spoken to here who've had their flights cancelled have been pretty calm and measured about what has happened to them. It's not a great way to end a holiday, of course, but one person did grumble to me and said, well, I wish I'd known before coming to the airport and spending hours waiting here, only to learn that my flight was being cancelled. I could have spent the day by the pool. But quite a few people have said to us that there's no point in getting angry or cross with the staff on the ground here. It's not their fault after all.
Nadia had a text from British Airways on Monday to tell her their flights were cancelled, but she didn't hear anything more.
My son has type 1 diabetes, he needs insulin, and unfortunately, because of the heat, some of his insulin went spoiled, so we didn't have much left. So it was rather crucial for us to get home earlier. So there was no options, because any trips through France or through other European countries required a long travel with many changes. So I thought, what if I go the other way? And I actually told them that I wouldn't mind flying to Tel Aviv and flying from Tel Aviv.
By later in the day, most UK-bound flights were taking off, albeit some with delays. The backlog appears to be clearing, but only after 48 hours of chaos. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News on Crete.
So the preliminary investigation into what caused the meltdown is pointing the finger at flight data. But exactly what and why will be poured over in the coming days. Our technology correspondent, Arti Nachiappan, has this on how the system should work and the scale of the impact when it doesn't.
With more of us flying more often, the role of air traffic control to keep us safe and maintain order in the sky has become ever more important. This is what a typical day of air traffic looks like coming into the UK, going out of the country and flying across it. As you can see, it's pretty busy. But yesterday, regular programming was disrupted after the National Air Traffic Services suffered a technical issue that brought down its operations. So what should normally happen before a flight takes off? First, a flight plan is produced by the pilot. It's then sent on to air traffic control, where it's automatically uploaded onto its overarching system. But yesterday, because of the technical failure, the system reverted to doing it manually. I spoke to a former board member of the Civil Aviation Authority who explained that this is why fewer planes took off.
As soon as you can't load them automatically and then have to do it slowly and manually, that is when you have to go and put a flow rate in place, and cut down the number of aeroplanes that you can handle at any one time.
To give you an idea of the scale of the problem, here's a snapshot of the flights coming into and out of the UK last Monday at 5 p.m. But when we go to the same time yesterday, you can see that the cluster of flights is massively reduced. So how many journeys were affected? 790 flights were cancelled, leaving airports across the UK. That's around 27% of all departures. Another 785 flights were cancelled coming into the UK, which is about 27% of arrivals. Overall, Heathrow had the highest number of cancellations, followed by Gatwick and Manchester Airport. Although the technical problem has now been fixed, the disruptions continue today. As of 9 a.m. this morning, 147 flights were cancelled leaving the UK. And another 134 flights were cancelled coming into UK airports. This is around 5% of all arrivals and departures. We are expecting answers on what caused the disruption in the coming days. But this will be of little comfort to those passengers still waiting to come home.
Yevgeny Prigozhin may have lived the last years of his life in a harsh spotlight, but his burial appears to have been a very private one. President Putin's spokesman had already said his boss wouldn't be attending 2 months after the attempted mutiny, which might have brought him down. Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, has more.
There were no honours, no gun salute, no military escort, just a hushed-up ceremony. And Yevgeny Prigozhin's final resting place, a workers' cemetery, now ringed by a cordon of guards. The man whose forces took Bakhmut, one of the only Russian victories in this wretched war, who made untold millions for Russia and himself with his Wagner mercenaries in Africa, has been humbled in death. In a way, Putin hopes sends a warning to others.
This is the biggest killing of a regime figure in all of Russian and Soviet history that I can think of, back actually to Stalin's times. This is a very big action by Putin and a demonstration of his determination to retain control, come what may.
While Vladimir Putin carried on business as usual, the Kremlin had only this to say.
The president's presence is not planned. We do not have specific information on the funeral. The decision on this matter is made by relatives and friends. We cannot say anything without them.
Prigozhin's descent from power and riches was as steep as his planes the day it fell from the sky, brought down almost certainly on Putin's orders. They did allow cameras to film another funeral, that of Wagner's money man, Valery Chekalov, who was also on that plane. No news yet of Dmitry Utkin's final send-off, the neo-Nazi deputy of the group, also on board. Prigozhin had lived his last year in a brash and brazen blaze of self-publicity, in marked contrast to his final fate buried without fanfare. For a man who rose from nothing and always had a common touch with ordinary Russians, it was perhaps a fitting end. Dominic Waghorn, Sky News.
Now, Florida has seen more than its fair share of hurricanes, but the latest, Idalia, appears to be being partly driven by some of the warmest seas seen in the region on record. It is due to make landfall tomorrow, accompanied by a surge of wind-driven seawater. Well, our US correspondent James Matthews joins us from Orlando in Florida tonight. And James, the fear is that the ultra-warm seas could turbocharge this storm.
That's right. Particularly warm temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico will propel Idalia on its way through the Gulf on towards the coast of Florida. It has been travelling over the past 24 to 36 hours up through Cuba and has caused flooding and damage there. It is a Category 3 hurricane, and as you point out, given that propulsion from the warm water that sits just above the warm air that sits just above very warm water, then the expectation is that it will batter Florida when it makes landfall just around about breakfast time tomorrow morning. To that end, people in the Sunshine State, as the skies darken, are being warned in several counties to evacuate, and those that remain in place are being told to make urgent preparations. A particular worry is from storm surges. With an increase in the movement of water and with already high tide, then storm surges at the coastline are predicted up to 15 feet. And the warning from the authorities is that they could be unsurvivable in populated areas, breaking properties free from their foundations on the coast and causing flooding inland. One of the warnings, the public warnings, has been issued by Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida, taking a break from the campaign trail to issue this to his constituents in the state of Florida.
This storm is going to hit tomorrow morning. You will start certainly seeing effects of this in different parts of the state later on today. You still have time this morning to be able to make your final preparations. If you are in one of those areas that's in line for some of the major storm surge and you're told to evacuate, you have time to do that. But you got to do that now.
As if things weren't bad enough with the hurricane on its own, there is a rare blue supermoon expected in the skies above Florida tonight. It's almost as if the elements are conspiring against the Sunshine State. Forecasters say that will intensify the gravitational pull on already high tides, and that could make the expected storm surge even worse.
James in Orlando, Florida, thank you. The Prime Minister has led the tributes to a police officer from Nottinghamshire who has died after being hit by a train. Sergeant Graham Saville had been attempting to save a man in distress on railway tracks at Balderton last Thursday. Rishi Sunak said his death is a terrible reminder of the work police do to keep us safe. Firefighters in Greece are still battling what has become the largest wildfire in the EU since records began. The blaze has been burning for 11 days now in northeast Greece, despite the efforts of hundreds of firefighters, assisted by a fleet of water-dropping aircraft. An inquest has heard that the cause of death of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif in Surrey hasn't yet been discovered, but the coroner says it's likely to have been unnatural. Police are trying to trace her father, his partner and his brother, who travelled to Pakistan shortly before Sarah's body was discovered in Woking. The water companies have become many campaigners' bête noire when it comes to water quality in England's rivers. But building plots and government policy may soon join them. Regulations over nutrients released from farming and the soil will be relaxed to try to drive the building of up to 100,000 new homes. Our science and technology editor, Tom Clark, reports.
Hi, I'm Rishi. How are you?
There's a desperate need for new homes. And by removing water pollution rules for house builders, the government is hoping to cement its reputation as one that can get them built.
Today's announcement will unlock 100,000 new homes in communities where people want those homes to be built. That's fantastic for young first-time buyers. Also will provide an £18 billion boost to our economy and support tens of thousands of jobs.
It should mean the 140 homes here will be coming sooner. The scheme in Dorset has had planning permission for 2 years, but according to the developer, there was no way it could meet nutrient neutrality rules, requiring it to compensate for any increase in pollution from new houses running into local rivers.
By now, we should be handing keys over to new homeowners. We should have started in May 2022. This will unlock much affordable, needed homes in the business, energy efficient homes as well for everybody. Also, within the developments, we are providing a lot more environmental friendly homes, sustainable with urban drainage, etc.
But the reason this housing development was put on hold in the first place is that the rivers around here are already too polluted. They can't handle more runoff or sewage from new homes. So while removing these environmental restrictions helps home builders, if the polluter doesn't pay, who does? In the short term, we do. The government is giving an extra £140 million to Natural England to fund schemes to offset pollution caused by new homes.
Numerous storm overflow sewage releases over the past year or so have happened right here.
But environment groups are worried.
The deregulating nutrient neutrality is a step backwards. We need to approach this from a number of different angles. One of them has to be regulation. We need to see sound, solid regulation that obliges the government, obliges water companies, obliges developers to do the right thing for our rivers and waterways, and that is reducing nutrients flowing into them.
The rule change might speed up the delivery of homes the government has promised, but this quick fix could turn out to be a dirty one for our rivers and coastlines. Tom Clark, Sky News.
It may have lost Labour a by-election and infuriated at least a section of motorists in London and its surrounding counties. But today, the expansion of the ULEZ ultra-low emission zone went ahead. Well, when it was first implemented 4 years ago, ULEZ covered London up to but not including the North and South circular roads. As of today, the area is 18 times larger, covering all 32 London boroughs up to the borders of the surrounding counties, reaching the M25 in places and encompassing around 5 million more Londoners. Similar schemes have been implemented throughout the UK, including Birmingham, Oxford, Glasgow, Bath and Portsmouth, as well as Aberdeen, Dundee and Edinburgh. Our climate change and energy correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter has this report.
Could you just bolt the kitchen ceiling for us?
Building company owner Michael Gibbs is based just a few streets outside the capital's newly expanded ultra-low emission zone, known as ULEZ. But he and his team frequently cross the boundary line for work. To avoid the hassle of a daily £12.50 charge per diesel van, he switched them for less polluting ones, even though as a resident of Dartford and not Greater London, he didn't qualify for any help.
I think it's an absolute joke, to be honest with you. We work for domestic people and they're struggling as it is. So now we've took the gamble, we've brought these vehicles, and at the end of the day, it might not work out for us because their mortgages are going up, they can't afford normal day-to-day stuff.
And are you going to have to pass on some of the costs you've incurred to your customers as part of your pricing?
Yeah, it's going to affect the pricing, of course, but there's nothing I could really do about it.
The ULEZ journey has not been a smooth one.
Some 9 million people now live inside London's ultra-low emission zone, the largest of its kind in the world. The hope was to deal with the twin challenges of air pollution and global warming, but it has been a contentious policy right from the very beginning.
Along the way, protest groups, legal challenges and by-election defeats have all threatened the expansion plans. Mayor Sadiq Khan taking a political beating.
Is it time to admit that you misjudged the scale of the opposition to your flagship policy?
Well, I've been clear from the start. The decision to expand the ultra-low emission zone was always a difficult one, but I think it's a vital one for me to make and the right one. And that's because I've seen the consequences of air pollution. I can't ignore that in this great city of ours, there's around 4,000 premature deaths a year.
Oh, yes.
For Rosamond Kissy Deborah, whose daughter Ella died as a result of air pollution, the fight has been worth it.
I hope before my time is up, we will be where the Scandinavian countries are. There will be no more asthma deaths. And people might say that's being ambitious, but if Finland can do it, Sweden can do it, Norway can do it, and we've done it during the pandemic, I know we can do it.
Despite the noble aims, ULEZ tensions remain. A policy clashing with people's tolerance for change and with consequences beyond London's borders. Hannah Thomas-Peter, Sky News.
Pharmacies are being asked to do more and more, but an analysis by Sky News shows there are fewer and fewer of them to do it. Nearly 1,000 have closed in England in the past 6 years, with the decline especially marked in deprived areas. Our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire reports.
Community pharmacies are being asked to do more to help take the pressure off GPs. The problem is, it's pharmacies themselves that are under increasing pressure. Sky News analysis reveals they're closing at a rapid rate, with nearly 1,000 gone since 2017, and the most deprived areas are the worst affected. Take Bedminster Pharmacy in Bristol as an example. Run by Ada Williams, it's a community pharmacy with a lot of services on offer. Prescription dispensing, screening services, vaccinations, through to travel clinics. They're all in high demand. Here's Ada's pharmacy on the map. 2 pharmacies nearby have closed in the last few years. That means more people rely on him, which means more pressure on him and his staff.
When you speak to the patients, they're talking about the stress of the costs of having to go further. They're talking about the pressures that brings on them. They're talking about the fact that the system, the NHS, seems further away from them. And they feel very displaced. Naturally, they feel very disillusioned because if your system cannot sustain the easiest access point for you, how do you feel or how does that say to you about your value?
Over the last decade, more pharmacies have closed than opened, especially from 2017 onwards, following a reduced government pay deal for pharmacies. That led to an 8% decrease in the number of pharmacies since 2017. And it's affected those in the most deprived areas the most. This chart shows left to right the most to the least deprived areas in the country. And the more deprived the area, the bigger the increase in the people pharmacies there serve.
When you think of the pillars of the NHS, you might name hospitals, you might name GP surgeries, social care homes perhaps, but pharmacies are the sometimes forgotten 4th pillar, and they perform a vital role. But increasingly, they're being asked to bear a heavier and heavier load.
And that means vital lifelines for local communities are being cut.
The people that can't get about, that's what's going to hurt. Yeah. The really elderly that need that,
Keep these pharmacies open. We beg the country, the government, keep them all open, please.
The Department for Health and Social Care told us that they're carefully monitoring access to pharmaceutical services, but that good access remains. In the most deprived areas, the worry is for how long. Tom Cheshire, Sky News in Bristol.
Now, they say a picture tells 1,000 words, and the expression on the face of neurosurgeon Dr. Hari Priyabandi certainly does that. She was describing to Sky News how she'd discovered a live 3-inch long worm inside the brain of a woman who'd been experiencing forgetfulness and depression. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore picks up the story.
It's a specimen from a medical horror story, an 8-centimetre parasitic worm that was pulled alive from a woman's brain. An MRI scan had revealed abnormalities, but neurosurgeons in Australia who operated were stunned by the cause.
I used my tumour-holding forceps to lift out what was there, and to my shock, there was a linear, wiggling, red line. And my registrar said, "Is it an artery?" And I said, "Of course not here." But I looked, and once that all passed, we could see it was moving. And I said, "Please just take it out of my forceps."
The 64-year-old woman, who hasn't been named, started developing mysterious symptoms in January 2021. They began with abdominal pain and diarrhoea, followed by a constant dry cough, fever and night sweats. By 2022, she was suffering from forgetfulness and depression. Doctors now believe the symptoms were caused by immature parasites moving from her stomach into her lungs and eventually her brain. The roundworm is common in the Australian carpet python. It's thought the woman was infected after eating a type of native grass that had been contaminated, the first human case of what's normally an animal parasite.
A cuddly little marsupial may come along and eat some grass which is contaminated with the python feces and the eggs of the parasite. That enters the mammal or marsupial, and it starts to develop further in that animal. Then another carpet python comes along and consumes that animal and now has a more mature form of the parasite in itself, and the life cycle gets completed. So that's what normally happens. We as humans are not involved. This was a pure accident.
The woman is responding to treatment. Doctors have praised her courage. Thomas Moore, Sky News.
Well, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we'll take a first look at tomorrow's newspapers in the press preview. With us tonight, the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Gleeman here in the studio, and the Financial Times Whitehall editor Lucy Fisher, who joins us down the line. Well, among the stories we'll be discussing, this one on the front page of The Sun. Their headline on the air traffic disruption, stuck for 2 weeks. We'll be right back with that in just a moment. Well, this is Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. First, though, a reminder of our top stories this evening. And the head of the UK's air traffic controllers has told Sky News that an incorrectly filed flight plan could be responsible for yesterday's IT failure, which caused delays for tens of thousands of passengers. A funeral service has been held in St Petersburg for the boss of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. And tributes are being paid to a police officer who has died after being hit by a train while trying to save a man on railway tracks near Newark. Well, hello there, watching the press preview. A first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman, who joins me here in the studio, and the Financial Times' Whitehall editor, Lucy Fisher, who joins us down the line. Welcome to both of you. So, as ever, let's kick off with the front pages, starting with the Metro, which carries an estimate that the air traffic disruption could cost the British economy up to £80 million. The Eye reporting that UK airlines, who weren't themselves responsible for the breakdown, have been accused by passengers of abandoning them. According to The Sun, some Brits trapped abroad could be there for up to 2 weeks. And as bad as it's been, the Mail says there won't be a penny in compensation for those who have suffered. The Express, meanwhile, has news that Rishi Sunak is tearing up Brussels regulations to speed up the building of 100,000 new homes in the UK. The Guardian says the Commons Foreign Affairs Committee wants Britain to take a tougher stance with China over human rights abuses. The Financial Times reporting that the investment bank Goldman Sachs used Chinese state money it had in its possession to buy a number of British and American companies. And finally, the Daily Star exploding a popular myth by telling us that scientists are now certain that having a few drinks does not make us look more attractive to others. Are we sure? Anyway, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out those front pages while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Lucy Fisher and Jenny Kleeman for your thoughts. And let's start, shall we, Lucy, with the Metro, the IT fiasco, as they put it, at air traffic control, and their assessment of what it's going to cost us all.
Yes, it is a whopping £80 billion bill they put on the disruption from a mere 4-hour computer glitch to the national air traffic system in the UK, which has led to 300,000 passengers being stranded. There are planes, crews, and of course, passengers stuck all over the place on the wrong side of the world. And this is disruption that could last for weeks. I'm not surprised that Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, has suggested this is the worst disruption to airline passengers in a decade. And that Downing Street has now also weighed in to urge airlines to fulfill their duties to stranded passengers. There's been complaints in the last 24 hours about the behaviour and conduct of some airlines, in particular, arbitrarily refunding airline tickets and leaving passengers to try and find their own way home. But clearly this is a chaotic incident that's going to impact on many thousands of people for days, if not weeks to come.
Yes, we'll come to what Nat said earlier today, issuing a statement, and I spoke to the chief executive. But first of all, let's focus on the passengers, which the Eye does, Jenny. UK Airlines accused of abandoning passengers. It's not the airline's fault, but it is about communication at this stage, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, it isn't the airline's fault. The airlines are under obligations to refund passengers when it is their fault. But, as in events of volcanoes, extreme weather, this isn't something that they can avoid. Many of them have been providing hotels and vouchers wherever possible. But there are people who will be missing out on work. How are they going to get that refunded? There will be people who have missed holidays or weddings, huge things. So there is a kind of blame game of who is going to be responsible. And, this backlog, I mean, we're so sick of this word backlog. We know backlogs in the NHS, backlogs in the Home Office processing asylum claims. There has been year upon year of crises for the aviation industry. If it's not COVID or strikes, it is now this. And what is so interesting in all of this for me is the extent to which it shows how dependent we are on technology, on semi-autonomous algorithms. When they fail, obviously there is a backup and it can be done manually, but it results in weeks potentially of disruption for travellers. Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, allowing flights to take off at night in an unusual step, expanding the time in which flights can be in British airspace. But this is a disaster, really, and it does beg lots of questions of how can something like this happen and bring aviation to its knees and leave so many people out of pocket and out of place?
Yes, and the Nats boss, Lucy, suggesting to me earlier, this is Martin Rolfe, whose salary, in fact, is on the front page of The Sun. He did say that actually a single flight plan misfiled by an airline, he would not say it was the French airline that many of the newspapers had earlier reported, could actually have caused this. So that, I mean, to me, that's extremely worrying that a single misfiled flight plan could actually cause disruption to, as you said earlier, 300,000 passengers.
Well, I think that's absolutely right. It is a marvel in some senses that this hasn't happened before, if that is what the investigation that's now happening by the Civil Aviation Authority into this debacle finds to have been the case. When this first arose yesterday, there was lots of sort of concern about whether this was a cybersecurity incident, some kind of hacking by a foreign hostile power. Downing Street's made clear today it is believed to be a technical issue, not a cybersecurity issue. And as you say, Anna, a lot of askance looks at the French over these reports that it is a French airline that misfiled the international format for landing and dispatch that is usually used by air traffic control systems, which then led to this chaos and for all the data to be input manually, but led to at least 280 flights having to be grounded both in the UK and overseas.
OK, and what happens next? Well, he said there's already been changes, Martin Rolfe. Obviously, the Civil Aviation Authority is investigating, reporting to the Transport Secretary. This cannot happen again.
No.
But does it make a cyber attack more likely? Because how quickly it topples over.
Who needs a cyber attack if you can have potentially one misfiled, the wrong aviation code can mean a 4-hour outage or 6-hour outage. I mean, there was some backup so that it could operate for a while, but you don't need cybersecurity threats if it can simply be human error or somebody putting a wrong code in. This really mustn't happen. The Transport Secretary is going to have a report into this apparently on his desk next week. In a way, it's a good thing, actually, that this has happened not, by all accounts, because of
by a bad actor,
bad actors, yeah. or people who wish to undermine us, because it shows the vulnerability in our system. But as we rely more and more on autonomous systems, on AI, this is one of the things that skeptics about AI warn about. We become so incredibly dependent on machines to do things for us that tiny glitches like this can bring us all to a standstill.
Yeah, one of your specialist areas, of course. Moving on, though, to The Guardian. James Cleverly arriving in China. First visit for some years. What was the problem? Hong Kong, etc.?
Well, look, I think there's, certainly question marks about why there hasn't been a visit before now of someone of James Cleverly's status. He is the most senior British official to travel to China since the pandemic. There have been tensions, the golden age, as David Cameron and George Osborne liked to call it, of Sino-English relations or Sino-UK relations of the coalition era have long since passed, with China hawks putting a lot of pressure on the British government to take a more robust line on Beijing, and the government having to try and walk a tightrope between engaging with China on global challenges like climate change, Ukraine, trade. Of course, China's so key to so many global supply lines. And on the other hand, recognizing where China poses what the government likes to call a systemic competition to the UK, and what, more plain speaking, MPs like to call a threat. And in particular, protecting industries that are critical to national infrastructure. So there's been, I think, this period of evolution of the UK's approach to China. But tomorrow will be a very big moment when James Cleverly sits down with Wang Yi, a diplomat who is, a chief proponent of China's wolf warrior style diplomacy, who takes quite an aggressive hardline stance towards the West. Nonetheless, this will be a key moment in trying to warm up relations that have been distinctly cool in the past couple of years.
Yes, and if we look, Jenny, at that, the headline in The Guardian, Britain must take China's human rights abuses seriously, according to MPs. And we've heard all of that before, haven't we? But the bottom line is the acceptance that a titan of trade on China's scale cannot be ignored.
Absolutely. I mean, this particular headline is to do with the Foreign Affairs Select Committee report, which is coming out tomorrow. That timing is potentially difficult for James Cleverly in what is perhaps the biggest diplomatic challenge of his career. It's a very delicate balancing act to be able to give the impression that Britain is cooperating when it comes to climate change or stance on Ukraine, but is also being robust when it comes to human rights abuses, and also China's belligerent stance with Taiwan. These are very delicate things to balance, and whether or not China is going to care about the Foreign Select Committee publishing a report that's critical of it remains to be seen.
To your byline in the Financial Times, Lucy, Brexit, dare we mention its name, and the way that we bring in food and fresh products. What's happened now?
Well, Anna, there has been a fifth delay to the implementation of new border controls on food and fresh produce coming from the EU into the UK amid concerns in Treasury quarters about the inflationary impact of this new border regime that the UK is looking to introduce. I think a really interesting moment today is that the Cabinet Office has admitted that it is actually likely to push up the price of food. It insists that this will be a minor impact. It estimates that it'll be, less than 0.2% across 3 years that it pushes the headline rate of inflation up by. But nonetheless, at a time of a cost of living crisis, I think that will be a worry to many people. I think we also must just say a quick word that, of course, checks on UK fresh produce going from Britain into the EU has faced stringent checks since January 2021. So the delay to those checks being implemented the other way, while many traders have asked for more time to prepare for the border regime coming in the UK, it has been a source of fury to UK farmers who point out that they're not on a level playing field with their European competitors when it comes to importing and exporting.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, Jenny? The questions why the UK might have worse inflation than other parts of the European Union. Not all of it, obviously, and nothing like Turkey, as we've seen. But certainly the tight labour market is one, and friction at the border has been another, even though this is not being implemented properly on certain sections of our economy.
I mean, this is interesting, though, because we all knew that Brexit wasn't necessarily about the economy. I remember being here years ago and people saying, it doesn't matter
Every night, you mean?
Yeah, exactly, that's what it was. It doesn't matter if we're worse off. This is about bigger things than just the economy. But this is interesting because this is the first time the government is actually admitting the costs of Brexit. And yes, they say that it's 0.2% inflationary rise, but nonetheless, it represents a kind of turning point, really, where the government is saying, yeah, we're having to pay a little bit more for doing this.
OK, Lucy, Jenny, stay there, both of you. Plenty more still to come in the next part of our programme, including the funeral for anti-Putin mercenary leader Yevgeny Prigozhin has, we're told, taken place. So what next for Russia and, indeed, the war in Ukraine? Back in a moment.
I'm Hannah Thomas-Peter, and I'm Sky's climate change correspondent. The UK is a world leader in wind power. Power! Power! People! rainforest, which is such an important ecosystem. It's known as the lungs of Africa.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news. She doesn't really enjoy speaking to the press, and it wasn't clear right up until the last moment that she was going to sit down with me.
I might be just very naive, but I do believe that change is possible, otherwise we wouldn't be climate activists.
I'm confident for the last 30 years we have known how bad it is. I'm not here to apologize. I'm here to fight for the next step.
You can see just the piles and piles of stuff, these sofas and people's desks and children's books, and you can see inside this home here people trying to sort out their home. It's just been devastating.
I think everything's at stake. The future of our planet, the future of the beauty around us, the future of you and me.
The 5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. With me, once again, Lucy Fisher and Jenny Kleeman. Welcome back to both of you. Jenny, rather, I meant to start. Let's go to The Guardian, shall we? And the picture there of, what you might describe as a lonely grave for the Wagner mercenary leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, once a hero of Russia, given this quiet, private funeral after his death in such extraordinary circumstances last week.
It's interesting, isn't it? So he was buried in this cemetery in St Petersburg. News of his burial was only released after the cemetery was closed for the day, 2 months after a failed insurrection that he led. I mean, you say it's extraordinary. It kind of is. It's also totally obvious that this was going to happen. Anyone who challenges Vladimir Putin comes to a sticky end. We all know this. What is so remarkable is how close Prigozhin was to Putin's inner circle, and what a massive volte-face it was, really, for him to turn against him. But we know that Vladimir Putin wants to show that anybody who crosses him pays heavily for it. And what's interesting is, yes, it was low-key. Why was it low-key, this funeral? Was it low-key because the family wanted it, because Wagner wanted it, or because the Kremlin wanted it? Nonetheless, he is dead and buried now, and the Kremlin has sent a very strong message that anyone who crosses Putin, is doomed, really, effectively.
Yes. And Christopher Steele, former head of the Russia desk for MI6, telling me earlier that he thought it was probably the GRU, probably sanctioned by President Putin. But just the videos that he put out on social media in Ukraine, plus that mutiny, there was no way this was not going to be the ending for Prigozhin, Lucy.
Yes, I mean, it's just an absolutely extraordinary narrative arc. The curbside hot dog seller who's promoted to Kremlin caterer, then takes on, founds and builds up the biggest private military company in the world, mounts an abortive coup against Moscow, and then is quite literally blown out of the sky. It is the stuff of Hollywood blockbusters. Rather than real life for most of the developed world. But we know that Russia is a gangster state. I think, as you say, it's sort of hard to know why the funeral today was quite so low key, as you point out, Jenny. But clearly, Putin is someone who likes to serve revenge, cold. I think there's a great line from the CIA director, William Burns, that Putin is the ultimate apostle of the payback. And certainly that seems to be the case here, that certainly seems there was some Kremlin involvement, or at least permissibility, to the explosion that led to the plane being quite literally falling out of the sky last week.
Yes, and can I stay with you, Lucy, as a Whitehall editor, front page of the Daily Express, picking up on this story about rivers and home building and a Brexit dividend with it, the idea of nitrates and phosphates being pummeled into the water, our waterways, etc. You know, how awkward is this for the government, who, after the sewage overflow issue, could be seen as a party not caring about our waterways in this country?
Yes, it's interesting take from the Express on this issue, trying to frame it as a positive development that Rishi Sunak is now free to abandon environmental protections mandated by the EU that the Express frames as being excessive and blocking home building by developers. I think the campaigners, the Green campaigners, got out ahead of this story on Sunday night on Monday night and today, to argue that actually this is yet another way in which, you know, Britain's waterways are being damaged by government policy after the real scandal of what has happened with sewage flowing into rivers, into sea, into swimming spots in recent years, and the rows back and forth with the water companies about the level of investment that they've made into storm outflows, the claims and counterclaims about whether this is to do with the infrastructure in the UK being outdated. But I think certainly this will be one of the dividing lines of the next election, the green issues. And for many people who don't want to see extra costs put on their energy bills when it comes to wider climate goals, I think there is something really visceral about the pollution of British waterways that the government might find itself on the wrong side of.
Yes. We're just going to end with the Daily Star. Rather disappointing news for all of us who happen not to look like Brad Pitt. Boffins say beer goggles don't work. Well, there wasn't much to go on in this short paragraph, so I looked it up, Jenny, and there was an article from February 2020 which said scientists prove beer goggles really exist, as booze can level the playing field. Good news, they say, for beauties and the beast. So in 10 seconds, we're confused.
I love the fact that you come to me for these stories. You come to Lucy for all the important stuff. Yeah, apparently the jury is still out of whether or not drinking makes your standards go lower. I think that's what it's about when it comes. Anyway, I give up. If anybody understands this, please let me know.